Hi, it's Jay, and welcome back to Jay Learning Videos. In today's video, today's going to be part 2 of the Ages of Europe, and part 1 is about the Roman Empire and the Middle Ages. So yeah, today is going to be part 2, which is Age 3 and Age 4, which are the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. So yeah, let's get started. Okay, so we are in Age 3, the Renaissance. So Europe had just come out of the Dark Ages at this time, and if you want to learn about that, part 1. And it had entered a new time of art and rebirth called the Renaissance, which ranged from 1300 to 1550. The name Renaissance actually means rebirth in French. The country Italy is, by the way, right in the middle of East and West Europe, a convenient spot for trading. And Italy was actually going to play a big part in the Renaissance. So because of its convenient spot for trading, Italy began to make tons of money. At the time, Italy was made up of city-states such as Rome, Milan, Naples, Florence, and Venice. The rulers of Florence were the Medicis. They used their money to sponsor the arts and the sciences. Europe was done with wars, and it was done with dark times. They rediscovered the artwork, literature, and architecture from the Romans, part 1, and the Greeks. Florence began to fall into a new age called the Renaissance. It was a rebirth and light after the darkness and the wars. So obviously art was a major part of the Renaissance. Egg tempera is a new kind of paint. It was the egg yolk mixed with pigment. And oil paints were also invented during this time, and they allowed artists to paint more realistically and three-dimensionally. The ideas for paintings and artworks became a lot more original and not just based off of religion. Sculpture was also popular during the Renaissance, and actually most common people worked in sculpture. And yes, so the statues were often based off of people and also off of religion and nature. They were made of bronze or marble, and they usually were made to express emotion or freedom. Famous sculptors in the Renaissance included Michelangelo and his sculpture David. The sculpture I have shown on the right is not David, it's just some random sculpture. Mannerism was a style of art and sculpture that actually emerged in the Renaissance. Mannerism literally translates to stylish style. Most mannerism art included distorting body parts and flattening parts of drawings. So, for example, if you were to draw mannerism art or make mannerism sculptures, you could make some body parts bigger than others, and especially in art, you can make some parts of the artwork 2D, you can make some parts of the artwork 3D. So yes, Luigi Lanzi popularized mannerism in the 1500s. Speaking of style, what you did and wore was very important during the time. Men always wore shirts and hats, and women wore long dragging gowns. Pastimes were chess, jousting, and bullfighting. Men were usually sculptors, painters, and engineers, while women usually worked in the house. Architecture was also a major part of the Renaissance. The buildings were built in a new style as well. Pillars, columns, pilasters, domes, and towers were now common in buildings. And actually, if you've watched part 1, you'll know that the cities in the medieval ages especially were more closed and they were walled in. And yes, but in the Renaissance, they built the cities open and much like how they are today. The Florence Cathedral, built 1436, is a famous building in Florence, which is where the Renaissance began. Cathedrals were commonly built throughout Europe, and a cathedral is basically the most important church in a city. Yes. Another famous cathedral is the St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, Russia. Engineering was developed in the Renaissance. Mathematical formulas, especially in algebra, geometry, and a little bit of calculus, were developed during the Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci, who we'll get back to, he was an engineer who designed many things such as catapults, parachutes, flying machines, the ornithopter, which is another type of a flying machine, and many bridges. The picture on the right is just one of Leonardo da Vinci's flying machines. So yeah, speaking of him, he is probably the most famous Renaissance man, and he was actually a lot of things. He was a sculptor, architect, inventor, engineer, painter, draughtsman, scientist, mathematician, theorist, and even a party planner. He lived from 1452 to 1519, and he made several remarkable influences throughout his life. But he was most famous for his inventions and artworks. He listed many things listed on the engineering slide, which is here. You see catapults, parachutes, flying machines, the ornithopter, which is a type of flying machine, and bridges. But his most significant were the flying machine and also the bridges he designed. The flying machine eventually led to our modern day planes, actually. He also painted many artworks, including Vitruvian Man and Mona Lisa, obviously the most famous artwork in the world, undoubtedly, which you can see in the Louvre Museum in Paris. Mona Lisa was painted in 1503. And that concludes the Renaissance, and we now enter the Enlightenment, age 4. So yes, at the time, the Roman Catholic Church, which again, part 1, it sold indulgences. These were basically tickets to heaven, which you could buy in exchange for money. In 1517, there was a man from Wittenberg, Germany, and his name was Martin Luther. He said that this was unfair and false. So Martin Luther wrote the 95 Theses, which was his argument against the church. He was asked to renounce his argument, but he refused, so he was banned from the church and made into an outlaw. Eventually, the church did make changes, but that wasn't for a long time. So he translated the Bible into German to prove his argument, because at the time, the only way you could get the Bible was from the church. He claimed that the ticket to heaven would be earned if you stayed loyal to God. He split the church in two, the Roman Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church, which has many other names today. People began to question the teachings of the church, and Europe entered a new period of science and reason, the Enlightenment. Galileo Galilei, who lived from 1564 to 1642, was an astronomer during the Enlightenment who made several remarkable discoveries. He supported the claim that the Earth revolves around the sun, and he was hated for that because at the time everybody thought that the sun revolves around the Earth. However, without him, we might still think that the sun revolves around the Earth today. Galileo also made many discoveries on planets and stars. He found craters and mountains on the moon. He found the phases of Venus. He found sunspots on the sun. And he found many stars in the Milky Way galaxy. But the most notable of his inventions in astronomy were his 4 moons of Jupiter that he discovered. Ganymede, the biggest moon of Jupiter, Europa, Io, and Callisto. The planet on the right, by the way, is Jupiter. He also inspired other scientists, and one of these scientists was Isaac Newton, who lived from 1643 to 1727. He was born just a year after Galileo died. He is one of the most famous scientists of all time, and he was inspired by Galileo. Newton was very influential towards modern-day sciences, and especially physics. He invented the reflecting telescope and also most of calculus, which started in the Renaissance, but it was mostly developed by him. However, his discoveries in physics is what he's most famous for. He discovered and explained gravity to the world. He also wrote the 3 laws of motion. The first law states that an object will not move until a force is acted on it. Second, more force is needed to push things with more mass. And third, there is an equal reaction for every action. However, during the Enlightenment, the world started using science and reason to explain many things, not just nature. They also started using reason to explain human rights, freedom, liberty, justice, and especially government. A lot of basic rights and ideas today emerged during the Enlightenment. Some examples include court and law, equality for all, which, as we know, was not really all at this time, freedom of speech and religion, and more. Economic ideas were also sparked during this time. So the following slides are not actually part of the Enlightenment, but they're grouped with it for the purpose of this video, and the time which they happened is around the same as the Enlightenment. The United States from America gained independence from Britain in 1783, not 1776, because the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, but the Revolutionary War only technically ended in 1783, so it only technically gained independence in 1783. Its constitution used many of these ideas of freedom and basic rights, which were mentioned on the previous slide. The American Revolution inspired many countries to do the same thing and get freed from their kings and queens or the empires that had colonized them. But one of them was France. In France, the king and queen had too much power. They were heavily taxing the people and spending all of that money on parties, and they were living in luxury and letting the people of France starve and live in poverty. There was a bread shortage in the entire country. In 1789, the people of France got angry and started to rebel. In 1795, they had the royals executed. Queen Marie Antoinette, one of the most famous queens of France, who was partially responsible for this French Revolution because she spent all of France's money on parties and her own needs or wants. So she was one of the royals that got executed. Before her execution, she said this: "Let them have their cake and let them eat it too." France fell into chaos without a proper ruler. The revolution continued on for another 10 years until an emperor was chosen. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte was crowned Emperor of France. He ruled France for another 10 years, and during this time, he sold the Louisiana Territory, one of the colonies of France in the Americas, to the U.S. In 1815, Napoleon was exiled, and France chose a president to be their ruler. And that is the end of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. So make sure you watch part 1 and make sure you watch part 3 and all the other parts which are coming out soon. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also make sure to check out all of my other parts which either have already come out or are coming out soon. And check out my channel because I have a lot of videos on other topics, and I actually have one on the countries of modern day Europe. So and all of the videos which were mentioned will be linked down in the description. So bye.